My name is Chris Cuban. I'm the president of the St. Louis PRSA chapter, and I want to welcome you to our 23rd webinar in the last 24 weeks. And this one is focusing on winning new business, and we have with us an amazing speaker, Jody Sutter. I actually heard her a couple weeks ago on another webinar that she did for another organization. But Jody's the owner of the Sutter Company, a new business consultancy that advises small agencies on organizing and operating their goals, their sales goals and strategy. So she started the Sutter Company after more than 2 decades of running businesses to develop new teams for agencies, large and small, and also spanning a diverse list of disciplines. So she also has a book called The Agency's Guide to Winning New Business, 8 Steps to Winning More of the Right Kinds of Clients That You Want. So we have a wonderful speaker with us today. And as you know, PRSA is a great organization to really network and get to know other people. And I encourage you, if you're not a member of PRSA, please join. Even though these webinars are free, and we will offer a replay on the PRSA St. Louis YouTube page. We want to thank you all for joining us. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Jody, but I would like to say if you have any questions or comments, please use the chat feature, and Jody's more than willing to stop the presentation to answer those questions as we move forward through the presentation. So Jody, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege, and I'm looking forward to sharing my thoughts with you today. So as Chris said, I tend to work with small agencies, so I'm thinking that probably most of you apply to that description. My clients tend to be anywhere from 1 to 2 people in an agency, so very small, up to about 50 or 55 people. And also, as Chris said, I've worked with agencies across all disciplines. Just what's common is their smaller size. And what I've noticed is some common characteristics around among the agencies that are particularly successful in winning new business and sustaining a successful new business operation. And what's interesting, to me at least, is that these tactics are not sort of hardcore sales, or they're not esoteric techniques that you have to work hard to learn. These are pretty straightforward practices that any agency can master. So just a little bit of context around what I do and why I do it. Like I said, my clients tend to be smaller agencies. And so as such, I focus on the particular business development challenges that come with running a small agency, growing a small agency, or even just shaping your agency into what you want it to be. So when I think about who my ideal client is, sometimes it's easier to describe what things are by describing first what things aren't. When I talk to leaders or CEOs of small agencies and they tell me something like this on the phone or in a Zoom call, I just need more leads in my sales pipeline. That's usually an indicator to me that that's not going to be the right type of client for me. Those are people who either don't need my services or they don't realize that they need my services. Because the fact is, we would all love our pipelines filled, or maybe a better way of putting it is that we'd probably prefer not to have to deal with a sales pipeline at all. It'd be really nice if the deals just naturally flowed through and you converted them at a rate that was easy to handle and transition new accounts. But the fact is, it's different. It's really much more of a feast or famine cycle. And that feast cycle is characterized by probably more business than you can really handle. Maybe not always business with the right kinds of clients, but revenue's pouring in, you're focused on that, and you're focused probably on very little else. And then there's the famine side, and that famine feeling, that scarcity can come on really quickly, and it can be pretty terrifying. So I think that this feast and famine cycle is probably going to be something that you recognize. I certainly hear about it a lot when I talk to agency CEOs who are going through this. And yet it was something we all recognize, and yet it's still a consistent and persistent problem. So going back to the conversations that I have with agency owners when they say, I just need more leads in my pipeline. A little bit of full disclosure here first. When I started my new business consultancy, I actually had decided that I would take on a job that most agency owners, most agency leaders don't want to do. They don't like it. They're not good at it. They may feel like it's the only way to generate new business for their agency or fill their sales pipeline. And that was lead generation, specifically that outbound prospecting, emailing, calling, trying to book meetings for my clients. I went into that business because I am one of those rare business development leaders with a background in sales. Most agency business development leaders that I have met have typically come up through the account manager level. They've had some sort of client-facing role before they move into business development. Very few come from a sales role. So I had done a lot of sales in my lifetime before I started working for agencies. So I understood what it took to generate leads through outbound activities. Any fear that I had of contacting and having a conversation with a stranger was extinguished a long time ago. So I decided I would take on that job that most agency owners didn't want to do. And my sales pipeline would be filled, I'd be terribly successful, and everything would be great. And as it turned out, my pipeline was filled. Yeah, indeed, there were many agency owners that found this proposition very attractive. The problem was I was not always successful for all my clients, which I didn't like. I wanted to be successful for my clients, of course, and so I explored why that was. Why was I successful for some clients, and not for others? Now, when I look back at it, I realized where I was successful. Those agencies that I was successful for, they showed these indicators of new business success that I'm going to talk to you about later. But the other thing that I realized as I was speaking with these agencies, again, mostly smaller agencies, mostly led by the CEO or a small leadership team, what I found is, oops, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead of my own script. Let me just go back for a minute. I apologize. This lead generation, one of the reasons why I realized why I was having so much difficulty generating leads for some of my clients is that they didn't have their story straight. As I said, they weren't necessarily showing those indicators for success. And so it didn't necessarily mean that they weren't smart and they weren't filled with talented people and they didn't do great work and they didn't have great clients. So what? For every one of those talented agencies that I was working with, there were hundreds of others out there competing for that same business. So after the first few frustrating assignments where I wasn't getting the traction that I wanted to get, I thought I need to equip myself with the ammunition in order to generate the interest for these clients to bring in leads. So I started asking questions of these prospective clients. I would interview them as they would interview me. And I asked them 3 very simple questions that are also deceptively difficult to answer. I would ask them, what are you selling? Who are you selling it to? And how are you selling it? They're also difficult to answer on your own, but they're also crucial. The better you can answer these questions, the better. Not only will your outbound prospecting be more effective, pretty much every new business and marketing activity that you undertake is going to be more effective. Let me get back on track to where I swerved a couple of moments ago. The other thing that I noticed as I was talking to these agencies and I was interviewing them and they were interviewing me, and they were telling me about their challenges, and they were saying how they wanted their pipelines filled. Most of the people I was talking to were CEOs of these small agencies. And I had a realization that in so many ways, these CEOs are the best business development resources that these small agencies had. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were the only business development resource that their agencies had, but they had certain qualities that are extremely difficult to replicate in other people at the agency. To be completely frank, they're the ones with the most at stake. They're the hungriest. They're the ones who are the most passionate boosters for the agency and the team and the work that they do. They're the ones who are willing to go without a paycheck when things go bad. They're entrepreneurial. They hustle to grow their business. They do what they have to do. And like I said, it's really hard to replicate that in other people. And the people, it's hard to instill that same passion in some of the people that you work for, no matter how dedicated and talented they may be. And it's almost impossible to replicate this in a business development person, when you're at that stage to hire one. And that's why that often fails. I don't know if there's anyone on the call today that has had that experience. Maybe they got to a certain level of growth. They were ready to hire a business development person, and it was a total and utter disaster. Maybe you started out by hiring someone who's too junior, and you realize that they didn't have enough experience and they required too much management. So then you went the opposite end and you hired someone super senior who maybe could bring in a Rolodex, which of course never materialized. And a year later, you felt like you were out a lot of money and didn't see anything in return. I'd be curious maybe afterwards to know how many of you that applies to. It's a common situation I see. So as I was evolving my business, I thought, well, what if I could help these CEOs, these people who are the best business development resource their agency had, what if I could help them develop their own, like sort of get in touch with their own business development mojo? What if I could equip them with what they needed to put in place in order to sustain a new business strategy without having to feel like they had to go out and hire a cold caller to generate leads? So as I worked with more agencies and as I shifted my business more towards the strategic work that I do now, really now I'm 100% focused on helping my agencies answer those three questions. What are you selling? Who are you selling it to? How are you selling it? And as I did that more, I started to see these indicators of success start to emerge. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So the first one is clarity. And this is really around clarity, around answering those first two easy but deceptively difficult questions to answer. What are you selling? And who are you selling that to? So they're difficult for a lot of agencies to answer because of my theory is it's because that the answers or the path towards answering these questions is often filled with a certain amount of fear. And one common fear is that the more specifically you can answer these questions, and then potentially you are going to cut yourself off from opportunities. So if you've got if you answer these narrowly and with a nice niche target in mind, what about all the other people that could potentially pay you to do what you do? And I want to counter that argument by saying if you're not defining your market, then your market is defining you, and you're constantly going to be in sort of a position of having to convince others that you're the right resource for them. Also, not being clear about the answers to these two questions has another downside as well, and that's financial, because pitching new business is expensive. And the less clear your answers are to these questions, what I've seen is that the more likely it is that you'll be spending more time and investing more money into the activities that you have to do in order to find clients and to win clients. The more clear you can be about what you're selling and who you're selling to, who your ideal client is, and why they value what you do, then your new business operation is going to be a lot more efficient. And it's useful too because you'll also probably find that your clients tend to pre-qualify themselves. Your prospective clients already come to you knowing that you're the one they want to work with, or you're one of a short list of agencies or firms they want to work with. The other thing I really like about these questions, the answers to these questions, and why I think they have so much utility, is that they form the basis of your elevator pitch. And I like the idea of an elevator pitch. I actually favor it when I work with my clients in strategic workshops. I favor it over the idea of a strategic positioning. That's not to say strategic positioning isn't super important, but what I find is that when agencies go into a strategic positioning exercise, it turns easily into a lot of navel gazing and a lot of fluffy language that makes you and your team feel good, but is unintelligible to a prospective client. So an elevator pitch, super practical. Once you have it, it's something you use every day. It's something your team can get behind and also use every day. But elevator pitches are also difficult. When I ask my clients what their elevator pitch is, that's another one of my favorite like pre-questions, pre-interview questions. What's your elevator pitch? They often struggle to come up with the answer, or if they don't struggle, the answer often sounds something like this. We're a full service integrated agency, and what makes us unique is our team of talented brand storytellers who always put the client first. I've yet to do this talk to a group of agencies when I haven't had someone message me or come up to me at the end of the talk and say, I chuckled internally when I saw this slide because that's our positioning. So this positioning is not taken from any one agency. It's an amalgam of a lot of the elevator pitches I've heard in the past. Now I have a formula to apply to elevator pitches of all kinds that helps my clients keep accountable when we're doing this elevator pitch exercise. And I ask them when they come up with their elevator pitch, I say, I want you to grade it based on these criteria. Is it succinct? Is it targeted to a particular type of client? Is it repeatable? Is it something that's easy to say? Is it something that's easy to teach your team members so that they can repeat it easily? Is it accurate? So I find a lot of times when my clients are working on elevator pitches or their strategic positioning, a lot of times it's aspirational. And there's nothing wrong with having big aspirations, but it doesn't belong in an elevator pitch. An elevator pitch, again, is supposed to be high in utility. It's got to be accurate. Is it flexible? So I like you to be very specific about what your elevator pitch. I don't think you should change it all the time. However, I do think there needs to be an element of flexibility so you can adjust it based on who you're talking to and what the situation is. Is it differentiating? Are they going to walk away understanding what makes you different from your competitors? And then the added bonus point, is it polarizing? Is there something about your elevator pitch that maybe not everyone will agree with? And that's okay, as long as the people you're meant to work with love what you're saying, love that polarizing point of view. The other thing I love about an elevator pitch is that it is this culmination of all the soul-searching strategic self-exploration that you've done, but it's also the foundation that you can use to build a robust and targeted sales and marketing plan. Essentially, almost every decision you make around what kind of sales and marketing tactics or activities you should undergo can be aligned back to whether or not it supports that elevator pitch and the elevator pitch supports that activity. So if you're an agency leader that's really resisted in doing this work, I guess I sort of have some good news, some cold comfort for you. I certainly know plenty of agencies out there who do not have a succinct, accurate, targeted, repeatable, flexible, differentiating elevator pitch. And most of those have muddled along just fine. So is it possible to run an agency without a targeted elevator pitch? Absolutely. But what you're going to find is that if you can do the work and if you can answer those key questions and put them into an elevator pitch format, you will find that it's a lot easier to identify your ideal client profile. And in fact, those ideal clients are probably going to find you more than you have to find them. It's going to anchor your point of view, and it's going to anchor your content marketing strategy. That's going to be a lot easier to develop. And I know sometimes that's a big sticking point, maybe not for PR professionals, but for others. It's going to help you decide when and what to pursue, and it's going to help you decide when you need to say no at the right for those opportunities that aren't right. It's going to allow you to feel more confident in your value, because now your value is easier and more succinct to describe quickly to an ideal client. Because these elevator pitches are easier to repeat and easier to embrace, your team is going to feel on board too. So they're going to feel less burned out. They're going to be more engaged. They're going to be less, they're going to be, it's less likely they're going to walk into work the next day wondering what you've decided is the positioning for your agency. They're going to be able to get behind a clear, succinct elevator pitch. And it's going to help you make more persuasive presentations. As I said, it really becomes the basis of all the sales and marketing tactics that you'll do henceforth. All right, number 2, the second indicator of new business success I see is a focus on the client. Now, of course, as services businesses, I would assume that what you do every day when you're servicing your clients, when you're doing the work for your clients, is that you are 100% focused on them. But what's interesting is what I see often is that same laser focus on the work, on the client and the work, then gets lost when you're put in a position to pitch a new client. And what I find is that the shift happens and you go from focusing on the client to focusing on you. And that's when you get agencies that might then lean too heavily on the standard, that sort of standard credentials deck that's filled with information like awards and clients and the stuff that's important in order to describe who you are and what you do, but it doesn't really differentiate you. The other thing about those credentials decks is that I find it encourages agencies to dump everything in there. And so what you end up doing is you end up sort of turning on this fire hose of information that the prospective client has to try to drink from when she didn't even realize that she was thirsty. So I want to tell you, the message today is that when you're preparing your pitch, to ask yourself, why should they care? Goes back to that question earlier, the so what question. Why should they care? Why should that prospective client invest time meeting with you versus investing time meeting with one of your competitors? So new business ready agencies, they frame their capabilities within the context of what they know or what they can intelligently assume about the prospective clients that they're pitching. So I think this is especially effective when it's part of your awareness building activities, your marketing activities, your content marketing activities, your thought leadership activities, because when you can frame your capabilities in your thought leadership around what you know about the client rather than what you know about you, then you're framing yourself or you're positioning yourself as an expert. And that's really appealing to a prospective client. They want to work with experts to help them solve the problems that they're facing every day. The other benefit is that when this prospective client interacts with information, with marketing material, with thought leadership that's framed around the context of what you know about your client, when they interact with that content, there's going to be a moment of self-recognition. There's going to be a moment when they feel like they're reading these messages and it's going to feel like it was written just for them, because of course it was. And then when they do pick up the phone or send you the email and ask for more information or a meeting to learn a bit more, you've already moved them down that funnel. They're already partially convinced. You just have to get them over the goal line. So again, it goes back to that really efficient new business process. The more you can frame your capabilities within the context of what you know about them, the more efficient your process is going to be. And I would guess, if any of you are like any of the agencies that I tend to work with, that over the years, over the course of time that you've been in business, you have amassed a tremendous amount of knowledge and insights about your clients and their business that you're probably not leveraging in the way you could for new business. So I want to leave you with an exercise that you can do to test this out. So one of the things that I do with my clients in our workshops is I will ask them to think about, to list the things that they know about their clients. I want them to start listing out the persistent and consistent struggles that they see their clients facing every day, that they're also, that my clients, that their agencies and their teams are in a position to help them solve. So I want you to start listing those things out. It can be stream of consciousness. You can do it on your own. You can do it with your team, but there are a few key guidelines that I'm going to give you. What you want to focus on is what you know about their struggle. So to take maybe kind of an obvious example or a light example, if you're an agency that works with a lot of financial services companies, a lot of banks, then one of the things that you know about their business is that they've got to navigate a lot of complicated regulations when they're marketing their products. In fact, if you're experienced, you probably even know what those regulations are. That makes you an attractive agency for a bank or a financial services company, because they know that it reduces the risk because you already have that knowledge. They have to train you less. They know that you can jump right in and help them solve the problem. So that would be a key thing that you want to include on this list. What you want to avoid is pointing out their weaknesses. So it may be true that most banks don't understand good website design principles, but that doesn't help you in this exercise. They'd probably agree too, which is why they need to hire someone like you or an agency like you. It's not necessarily an insight into one of their business struggles. So you don't want to focus on that. You also don't want to, avoid the temptation to start going into what you could do for them if they asked you to. I see that a lot. I see often, my clients will often start with a very clear list of insights, and by around the 7th or 8th, they start talking about what they could do for the client. So don't focus on what you could do. Try to avoid where you feel they're weakest, and really focus in on what you know about that client business. Now this can be, you can have one particular client in mind, you might have a category in mind, but I'd be curious to know if you do this exercise, how it works for you. And then once you've done it, I want you to take a look at those insights, and first of all, appreciate how much you know about your client's business, and then see if you can, again, reframe those into messaging that's more client focused and less about you. All right, number 3. New business ready agencies are in touch with their compelling story, and they take time and a great amount of care and thought in crafting these compelling stories. And this is important because you guys are selling something that is super abstract. So if you think about what clients pay you for, they pay you for your ideas, how you got to those ideas, and then what you're going to do with those ideas. That's really abstract stuff. And the problem is that abstract things are difficult to describe, and because they're difficult to describe, they're difficult to value. And here's the paradox, is that agencies in general are not necessarily skilled in sales techniques. A lot of agencies don't even really appreciate nurturing a sales culture. A lot of them see sales as icky. So you're not necessarily supported in that way, and yet you have one of the hardest things to sell, this abstract thing. That's where your value lies. So it's also, by the way, it's the reason why you tend to see this kind of stuff a lot, because you're trying really hard to somehow key into that value. This is a perfect example of an agency that is still stuck on the abstract stuff that they do, and they haven't figured out how to turn it into something tangible and actionable. So your compelling story is an antidote. Your compelling story is important because, luckily for you, while you may not be a natural born salesperson, you are a natural born storyteller. In fact, every human being, or almost every human being, is. We all are born with this innate ability to not only relate to stories, but to be skillful at telling stories. It's an important part of being human. And as PR professionals who are in the business of telling compelling stories, you probably already know this. You probably already know that our species has been telling stories for thousands of years as a way to explain and to understand a world that is complicated and contradictory and abstract. In fact, and you probably already know this too, but just in case you don't, there's scientific research that shows that when we are being told a story, when we're engaging in a story format, that our brains fire off electrical impulses, and we do something else subconsciously. We seek to relate the events in a story to events in our own lives. So that creates a powerful emotional connection. And so that's why your story is so important. It offers concrete context for understanding your value, the value of all those abstract things that you do, your ideas, and it creates an emotional connection between you and your audience. You know, the other thing that's powerful about a story is that is when you can also show a little bit of vulnerability. And I know that's sometimes really hard. Of course, why would you want to show vulnerability? Why would you want to show your soft underbelly when it's a, you know, it's a competitive world out there? I want to give you a really quick example, a recent example of a client that I've started working with in the last few months. As I was getting to know this agency, they were talking about what happened back in March when the COVID-19 shutdown started to happen. And you might be able to relate to this, but over the course of 2 consecutive days in March, they lost the majority of their revenue. Their clients simply closed up, stopped spending, and instead of giving up, my client, this agency, they pulled together as a team, and over the course of the weekend, they put together a continuity plan. They made quick and decisive they took action on cutting the costs that they could cut, and they decided to double down on the constituents, on the businesses that they knew needed them most. Some of those were existing clients, and some of those were prospective clients. So they decided that the best thing that they could do was to help the industry that they served. And as a result, now several months later, what they're finding is that they've been able to make up that revenue and more. And things are actually looking pretty good. They made some hard decisions and it worked out great. So what I love about that story is that if I had just told you, instead of telling you that anecdote, if I had just told you that I started working with a client that is really biased towards action and is determined and is gritty and is scrappy and makes fast decisions, that would have had less of an impact. That would have been a more abstract description without the context to really anchor you down to what that means. I think you'd probably care less. But I've just told you a story that I think causes you, instead, by telling you a story, what probably had happened is that you may have already started forming those same opinions or those same thoughts in your own head. This agency sounds like they're really scrappy. They were super decisive. They were sort of courageous in their decision making. So that's another really important thing about your compelling story. It allows your prospective clients, allows your audience to draw those conclusions. And it means that you don't have to rely on all those descriptors which sound meaningless when they come from you. I want to quickly though talk about the difference between story and narrative, because I think this also has a big impact on your business development messaging. So the difference between a story and a narrative. I just told you a story about my client and what they did to maneuver around the disaster of March 2020. The story, as you will have noticed, was closed-ended. It had a beginning, middle, and an end. There were limited nodes for participation. And in other words, what I'm hoping is that you didn't feel sort of this impulse to interrupt me and add to the story. You're probably quite happy to be the recipients of the information. It also can be retold and used as an example. A narrative, on the other hand, is open-ended. It's constantly in the process of unfolding. It can work on a personal, institutional, and a social level. So, for instance, that story that I told you about my client, that fuels their narrative. It works on the level of the CEO. It works on the level of the people who support the CEO, the team that works there. And it also works on a broader social level because their clients and the clients, constituents, strategic partners can also take part in that narrative. It has an implicit invitation to participate. So what I would say is that another important distinction here too is that a narrative is something that is woven whether you control it or not, which is why it's so important for you to be able to control it. So the stories inform the narrative, but if you tell stories that are contradictory or if you allow your audience to draw their own conclusions, they will weave a narrative and it might not match up to the one that you want to tell. I'll give another really quick example. Sometimes, I'll run into a lot of agencies that will say something like, well, our people are our difference. And first of all, as a quick aside, your people, as fantastic as they are, your people are never your difference. That's a topic for another webinar. but they'll say, well, our people are our difference. Our people are what makes us special. And then if you go to their website and you click on the team section of the website, either it's confusing or hard to navigate, or they only show some people or don't show others, or it's really hard to figure out who the leadership is, or there's no bios. So that to me says, well, if you're telling the story about how important your people are, if you're trying to weave this narrative of people are your difference, you're not telling the right stories to support it. So I'm going to create my own narrative, which is, well, they're telling me one thing, but the evidence is of another thing. And that's not positive. Okay, moving forward. A fourth new business indicator that I see is agencies who know their strengths. So this is another epiphany I had when I started working, doing more strategic business development work with CEOs of small agencies. What I discovered is that it was going to be pretty much impossible to get the CEO of a small agency to do something that he or she didn't like to do, or didn't want to do, didn't understand. It didn't matter how much cajoling or persuasion that I might put behind it. If it wasn't an activity that they felt aligned to, it wasn't going to happen. So again, I thought, well, how can I figure this one out? And I started thinking, well, maybe there's a way to focus more on their strengths and the activities that align with those strengths, rather than sort of that sort of standard new business stuff that maybe not everyone is good at. So as I started thinking about this, 4 strengths profiles emerged, and I want to introduce you to those quickly. They're the hunter, the promoter, the communicator, and the thinker, and perhaps you'll recognize yourself in one or maybe more than one. Let's start with a hunter. So hunters are as close as you're going to get to a natural born salesperson at an agency. They have an instinct for selling. They're energized by connecting with others. They feel comfortable networking with strangers. One of the ways I describe it is it's that person who will get on a flight at JFK in New York, and then when they get off that flight 6 hours later in Los Angeles, not only do they have a business card, but they've got a potential deal simply by the conversation that they had with the person that they were randomly seated next to. That's a hunter, and not everyone can do that. I certainly can't. It's never been a strength of mine. So they're energized by connecting with others. They're at ease when talking to strangers. They're fanatics for customer satisfaction, and sometimes that can be their downfall. They don't always, for all their advantages, for all their high points, they sometimes find it hard to push back against a client when the client starts making unreasonable requests, and that can often drive their team crazy. So fanatics for customer satisfaction, sometimes to a fault. Then there are the communicators. Communicators are big picture people. They're really good at taking complex ideas and boiling those complex ideas down into ways that everyone can understand. They captivate a crowd. They love being on stage. They're perennially on the pitch team. I used to work for a lot of big agencies. And so you would think that we would have our choice of, hundreds of people that we could choose to put on the pitch team. It always came down to going back to the 2 or 3 communicators that we knew were going to be great in front of the room. The downside is they don't always have the patience needed for nurturing relationships in the way that hunters sometimes do. Communicators, once they get really good and once they develop a reputation for themselves, can also have a reputation for being not only brilliant, but a little bit arrogant too. So you want to use their strengths in very particular ways. Then there are the promoters, and I'm hoping everyone knows who this person is that I'm showing here. He's my poster child for the promoter, and that's Gary Vaynerchuk. He's the founder, and I think still CEO of VaynerMedia, an agency which still bears his name. So promoters, including Gary Vaynerchuk, they tend to be people with really big personalities. They've got something to say, and they aren't afraid to say it. They enjoy being the center of attention, kind of like the communicator, But unlike the communicator, they're not always that great. And, you know, they're not always necessarily who you want to give your keynote speech. I don't know if anyone's ever seen one of Gary Vaynerchuk's keynote speeches, but they're not always that sophisticated. He makes up for with energy for what he lacks in terms of content and impact. They got something to say, not afraid to say it. Their business bleeds into their personal life and vice versa. They are connoisseurs of the personal brand. So Gary Vaynerchuk, again, a great example because he practices what he preaches. He started his business as a way to promote his family's wine business, and now it's turned into one of the biggest digital agencies in the world, but practices what he preaches. He's got over 1 million Twitter followers. He's constantly on social media. He's posting videos all the time. He's always on. And even though his agency has gotten to a point where he probably has a big new business team, I would bet that a lot of people still contact VaynerMedia based on the reputation of Gary Vaynerchuk, based on the strength of his personality. And then finally, we have the thinkers. Thinkers are the introverts. They're the ones who are energized more by interacting with information or data than they are interacting with other people. Although, like the communicators, they also tend to be very adept at taking complex things and turning them into concepts that are really easy to understand. They've got a lot more patience for the details. So they may not be the ones going out into a room full of strangers and handing out business cards, but they are actually but they're going to be more patient with the details. And they also can be strong presenters as well as strong with interpersonal relationships. The trick is they just need to, there has to be a strong purpose. There has to be a reason for them to do it. So I think thinkers can be excellent business developers as well. You just have to tap into those strengths. I used to work with a thinker. He was the head of research, and he was, you know, he was a quiet, unassuming man, but he was really good at taking complex ideas and making them easy to understand. He was also an excellent presenter. He was kind of my secret weapon as well when I would be putting together these large pitch meetings, pitch presentations, because the audience, the prospective client, often didn't really expect Joe to get up and kind of wow them in the way that he did. And he did it in his own quiet, unassuming, authentic way. So just because you're a thinker doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be an excellent business developer. So once you understand what your new business strength is, it makes it easier to think about the tactics and the activities that you should be doing that align with those strengths. And we're really talking about your new business plan. And I put this under the category of cultivation. So once you've gotten to this point, you've got your story, you're clear about what you're selling, who you're selling it to. You've learned how to frame your messages from within the context of client needs. You've got a compelling story, and you've woven those stories into a compelling narrative. And you've learned what your strengths are and how to play to them, and how to avoid doing things that don't necessarily play to your strength. Now you want to pull this all together into a plan where things will feed upon each other, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I want you to nurture it as an ecosystem. I call it a new business ecosystem because, like any ecosystem, a natural ecosystem consists of systems and components that work well together. So you wouldn't want to introduce something foreign into an ecosystem, because then not only will that component not survive, but it might actually do damage to everything else. You don't want to plant a tropical flower in Alaska, for instance. But when you do nurture things as an ecosystem, often what you'll find is that each thing becomes easier because they complement each other. So in my new ecosystem, I have four categories or 4 parts. Start with your intellectual property, and this is all the original content that makes you who you are. So this would include your strategic positioning, your elevator pitch. It includes your work process, your work product, It includes your team and your team bios. And of course that changes as your team may change, but it's all the stuff that you own, for a want of a better term. Now, intellectual property, it's your case studies, it's your any intellectual property that you produce, or like your thought leadership. So intellectual property is something that should be cared for diligently and monitored and updated on a frequent basis. And I often find that sometimes agencies take a one and done approach, something that has to be nurtured all the time. When you have a strong foundation of intellectual property, that can then inform your marketing, sales, and closing tools. So marketing tools being the things that that generate awareness for your firm, that market your firm, but also support sales. Your sales tools, though, I define those as the things that are exclusively pertaining to sales. So that might be your CRM database, the strategy that you have around asking for referrals, your sales scripts, things like that. And then there are your closing tools. So I call the closing phase at the point at which a client says, yes, I'm interested in learning more. I've got a scope of work, I have a budget, and I potentially want you to work on the project with me. Then you move into closing. So this would include your pricing templates, your proposal templates, your closing process, the roles and responsibilities. I also put the credentials deck in closing tools because I actually think we use it as a marketing tool when really it's more about post-rationalization and justification than it is about selling. And I'd be happy to, I probably don't have time to explain my point of view there, but happy to be able to talk to you about it if you're interested in knowing more about why I feel that way. So how do you choose the components of your elevator pitch? How do you know, or how do you choose the components of your new business ecosystem? How do you know they're the right components? Well, they're going to align well with your elevator pitch. The team is going to be capable of creating, using, and maintaining the components. In other words, it's going to play to your strengths, and it's going to match the new business strengths of the leadership team who is responsible for growth. So to give you a really quick example, if you or your agency is run by a communicator, they're not going to excel with an outbound sales program. If you are just starting out and putting a new business plan in place, what you probably want to do is capitalize on those strengths and get them out there speaking at events like this and learning how to take that exposure and convert that into leads. And then you probably want to support that person, depending on what kind of resources you have, with some good publicity, and maybe also with a strong detail-oriented coordinator that can keep that person on track, that can maintain the schedule, that can ensure that they are continually producing thought leadership content, and that can also follow up on the leads that come in because of the thought leaders' activities. So the other thing I want you to ask yourself too is, or what people often ask me is like, well, where do you start? So I will ask you back to think of what's the one thing that if you had to choose only one new business activity that you feel most drawn to, what would that one thing be? And then commit to that one thing until you feel like there's this level of operational excellence. And often that can take between 6 to 18 months or sometimes longer to build the momentum where you feel like there is a level of operational excellence. And then once you have that, ask yourself, what's one more thing? And sometimes that'll come quickly and other times it'll take time. But by doing that, you're now starting to constructively build your new business ecosystem, because that one more thing should be something that, again, complements that. So an example might be, if you're publishing a lot of great thought leadership, that one more thing might be a newsletter to capitalize on the email list that you've started to build. So the top 5 indicators, just to conclude, you want clarity around who you're selling to, and what you're selling, who you're selling to. You want to focus on the client, not on yourself. You want a great story, a compelling story that also includes some vulnerabilities. You want to know your strengths and you want to play to your strengths. And you want to create a new business ecosystem in which you can cultivate growth. So I thank you for your time. I hope I haven't taken too much of it. I wasn't watching it, but if you would like more information, I do have a guide, a new business ecosystem guide, if you'd like to play around with that. And you can download that by going to thesuttercompany.com/new-business-ecosystem. I'd also be happy to offer anyone on the call today a complimentary new business consultation if you'd like to run a few ideas by me, or just ask me a couple of questions if you've got some tough problems that you need help tackling. And you can go then back to my website, thesuttercompany.com/start-here, or you can do it the old-fashioned way and email me at jody@thesuttercompany.com, or give me a call. And I think that Chris will probably make this presentation available to you as well. And so you'll have this information.
Absolutely. By tomorrow, we will have this up on the PRSA St. Louis YouTube page. So we encourage you, if you want to see any part of this again, please go to the YouTube page. And Jody, I want to thank you. I'm going to toss it over to Bridget in Kansas City. But first, I'm going to say we still have a lot of people on the webinar today. If you have any specific questions that you want to ask, please put your name in the chat and I will make you live so you can ask that question live. So I encourage you to do this now, but I'm going to toss it over to Kansas City with Bridget.
Hi, thank you, Jody.
Hi, Bridget.
This was really good. I work for a university in Kansas City, and although, I mean, we have clients because we're centralizing so much more of our communications and marketing. And so this has been really helpful because we have to look at each unit or school or project as a client, and that's what we call them. And so this gave me some really good ideas. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad.
Well,
great. Yeah, it's
or go ahead, Jody.
I was going to say I work with a couple of agencies that have universities as clients, and so I know secondhand how complicated it can be managing all those stakeholders. So I'm glad it was helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Well, and I truly appreciate your words of wisdom here, because as a small business owner myself, I started a company as an independent solo practitioner, and now I've grown. And we always have those problems of feast or famine. Is you got too much work and you can't take on new clients, or you can't pitch new clients. But it's kind of like the 30-90-day rule. Is I've learned in a lot of the books that I've read is whatever you do in this 30 days, you're going to see the results in about 90 days. So you have to really focus on today to see results in the next 90 days.
Yeah, I often with my clients, one of the things that I will tend to default to when I feel like it's just taking action. So planning is great, strategy is great. I'm big on that, but a lot of times it's like, what can we get you doing quickly? And because I think it's, we get results. We only get results from our actions.
Absolutely. So is there any other questions? I know Melissa just said she's going to watch it because she only could chime in a little bit late today. So she missed part of it. But please, we have just a couple more minutes left. If you'd like to ask any questions, put your name in the chat. But again, Jody, I know people can reach out to you. You have your book on Amazon for, I think, $6.99. And the book is called Small Agency's Guide to Winning New Business, 8 Steps to Winning More of the Right Kinds of Clients. And then I truly appreciate your offer to do a consultation with anyone that wants it. And I guess we do have a question here. What is the one thing that you hope everyone took away today?
One thing that is, I suppose that maybe, I think what's most important is to understand that everyone has the potential for generating the revenue that they need to have a thriving agency. And again, what I'm hoping that these 5 indicators illustrated is that they're all within your grasp. I don't know of any professional that isn't in a position to master them. So I think that's the most important thing, that like I said at the beginning, it's not relying on esoteric sales techniques or high pressure tactics. It's really about working with your strengths and doing stuff that you're probably already good at doing.
And just to add another point of interest is those of you that are looking to do more sales and fill up that pipeline, is there's a whole bunch of books out there that you can read from. And it's almost mind boggling when you look into sales and how to do sales. And there's some authors that I have read in the past that have helped me is Mike Weinberg, who just happens to be from St. Louis, who's written a book called New Sales Simplified. Another book that I know in our industry as agency owners through Counselors Academy have really helped a lot of us is called Fanatical Prospecting. And it's a book by Jeb Blunt that I see whenever I get low in my, let's say, pipeline. I'll reach out and read that book or listen to it on audiobook, and it gets me re-energized into moving forward and going after new clients and kind of a different approach. But you'll find your way. Please consider buying Jody's book. And
yeah, you know, I'll also, a couple of books, I haven't read the Jeb Blunt one, I really want to, but a couple of books that have been really instrumental for me is Spin Selling, S-P-I-N, a classic sales book that I think a lot of people who are not natural salespeople or don't feel they are will feel comfortable with, and a newer one called The Challenger Sale. It's all about, it'll really help you put some skills around consultative selling in place.
Well, thank you all for being here. As I said at the beginning, this is the 23rd webinar that we've done in the last 24 weeks. So we appreciate you joining our PRSA Webinar Series. And I do encourage you to go to the YouTube page. We are going to have more webinars until the end of the year. So please come back and join us.